Wilson and Andrea's story began like a fairy tale. They met at a friend's wedding where Andrea, with her infectious laugh and magnetic energy, captured Wilson's attention immediately. He was a reserved man who found his strength in his intellect, while Andrea was the social butterfly who thrived in the limelight. It was a union of contrasts. Yet they complemented each other beautifully. From the start, they dreamed of a future built on mutual love and respect. For the first 7 years of their marriage, life treated them kindly. Wilson's career as an IT specialist flourished, and Andrea devoted herself to creating a warm and welcoming home. Their small suburban house was modest, but full of love. Wilson often joked that Andrea's cooking could rival the finest restaurants in the city. She would laugh and call him a hopeless romantic, though the smile that lingered on her face always betrayed her pride. Their bond was strong, rooted in years of shared experiences and mutual admiration. They weren't the wealthiest couple, but they were content. Vacations were rare, but they didn't need extravagant trips to feel fulfilled. A simple picnic in the local park or a movie night at home with popcorn was enough. Wilson adored Andrea's ability to find joy in the smallest of things, and Andrea admired Wilson's quiet determination and devotion to her. However, life has a way of testing even the strongest bonds. The turning point came when Wilson fell ill. What began as mild fatigue soon escalated into a debilitating illness. At first, they thought it was a passing flu, but as weeks turned into months, it became clear that something more serious was at play. Wilson's once sturdy frame grew gaunt, and his energy dwindled to the point where even walking to the kitchen became a Herculean task. Doctors diagnosed him with a rare autoimmune condition. The treatment was grueling, rounds of medication that drained him both physically and emotionally. Andrea stood by his side through it all, holding his hand during hospital visits and ensuring he took his medications on time. She became his rock, her strength unwavering, even as their world seemed to collapse around them. But Wilson's illness brought with it another blow. He could no longer work. His job, which had been their primary source of income, slipped away as his health deteriorated. The company tried to accommodate him at first, offering remote work and flexible hours, but as Wilson's condition worsened, it became clear that he couldn't meet the demands of his role. The financial strain was immediate and suffocating. While they had some savings, it wasn't enough to sustain their household indefinitely. Medical bills piled up, and their once comfortable lifestyle began to feel like a distant memory. Andrea tried to hide her growing anxiety, but Wilson could see the worry etched on her face. She started cutting back on non-essential expenses, clipping coupons, and stretching every dollar. But it wasn't enough. One evening as they sat at the dinner table, Andrea broke the topic that had been weighing on her mind. "Wilson," she began hesitantly, her eyes fixed on her plate. "I've been thinking, maybe it's time for me to start working." Wilson looked up surprised. "Andrea, you've done so much already. I don't want you to feel like you have to take on more." "It's not about that," she replied, her voice steady despite the lump forming in her throat. "This is about us. We're a team. And right now we need to work together to get through this. Stacy called me the other day. She said there are opportunities in the city, and she's willing to help me get started." Wilson was silent for a moment, his mind racing. The thought of Andrea leaving even temporarily filled him with dread, but he knew she was right. They couldn't continue like this. "Are you sure about this?" he asked finally, his voice tinged with both concern and resignation. Andrea reached across the table, taking his hand in hers. "I'm sure, Wilson. This is for us. For our future, the decision was made." Within a week, Andrea packed her bags and left for the city, promising to call every day and visit as often as she could. The first few weeks were challenging for both of them. Wilson felt her absence acutely, the house suddenly quiet and devoid of her laughter. Andrea, meanwhile, navigated the unfamiliar world of job hunting and a bustling metropolis. True to her word, Andrea called Wilson every evening, updating him on her progress and reassuring him that she was doing everything she could to help. "I've got a few leads," she said one night. "Stacy introduced me to some people who are hiring. Fingers crossed I'll find something soon." 2 weeks later, she called with good news. "I got a job, Wilson," she exclaimed, her excitement palpable even through the phone. "I'm working as a caretaker for a wealthy family. The pay is amazing, and I'll be able to send money home every month." Wilson felt a wave of relief wash over him. "That's wonderful, Andrea. I'm so proud of you." But as the weeks turned into months, Andrea's calls became less frequent. She was always busy, she explained, her days filled with demanding tasks and long hours. Wilson, still recovering from his illness, tried to be understanding. He reminded himself that Andrea was doing this for them, sacrificing her time and energy to keep their family afloat. What Wilson didn't know was that Andrea's life in the city was far from what she had described. Stacy had introduced her to a talent agent who was immediately taken by Andrea's beauty and charm. "You've got a natural presence," he told her during their first meeting. "I can see you doing well in this industry." Andrea was skeptical at first. Modeling wasn't something she had ever considered, but as she attended her first few auditions and landed small gigs, she found herself drawn to the glamour and excitement of it all. The money was good, much better than she could have earned as a caretaker, and the work was far more exhilarating than she had expected. Before long, Andrea was booking high-profile gigs, runway shows, photo shoots, commercials. Her face was becoming a familiar one in the industry, and her confidence soared with each new opportunity. But with success came temptation. Jack, a powerful figure in the modeling world, entered her life like a whirlwind. He was charming, influential, and magnetic. At first, their interactions were strictly professional, but it wasn't long before they crossed the line. Andrea justified her actions by telling herself it was all part of the job. Jack held the keys to bigger and better contracts, and maintaining a good relationship with him was essential. She never considered the moral implications of her choices, nor did she think about how her actions would affect Wilson. When Wilson called, she continued the facade, weaving a web of lies about her life as a caretaker. She believed she had everything under control, confident that her double life would remain hidden. Andrea's life in the city had transformed drastically. What began as a temporary job hunt to help her ailing husband had turned into a dazzling world of glitz, glamour, and secrets. She reveled in her newfound independence and the opportunities that modeling brought her. In those moments of bright lights and flashing cameras, it was easy to forget the promises she had made to Wilson, the man waiting for her back home. But as Andrea's modeling career soared, so did her moral compromises. Jack, the influential agent who had taken her under his wing, became more than just a professional connection. Jack was a man who could open doors no one else could. His charisma was undeniable, and his promises of wealth and fame felt intoxicating. Andrea, who once held her values so tightly, found herself loosening her grip as the lure of success, and Jack's magnetic charm overtook her. At first, their relationship seemed harmless. Late-night business meetings stretched into drinks at exclusive bars, then extended into long dinners and private lounges. Jack was attentive, charming, and always quick with compliments. Andrea had never felt so desired and powerful. Jack made her believe her success wasn't just professional. She was now part of an elite world where rules were bent and loyalty blurred. Andrea told herself that it was just business, just a way to stay on Jack's good side, ensuring a steady stream of contracts. But she couldn't deny the chemistry between them. Jack's attention felt electrifying, especially compared to Wilson's quiet, steady devotion. When Jack leaned in for their first kiss after a particularly successful fashion show, Andrea didn't resist. That night marked the beginning of their affair. Andrea tried to convince herself that it didn't mean anything, that she was still the same person who had left her husband to save their family. But the truth was harder to face. Andrea was no longer the woman Wilson had married. The affair with Jack quickly escalated. What started as stolen kisses turned into secret rendezvous in luxury hotel rooms and weekends away under the guise of work trips. Jack, who was used to getting what he wanted, showered Andrea with gifts, designer handbags, jewelry, and even a car. Andrea soaked it all in, letting herself be swept up in the illusion that this was the life she deserved. Yet Jack's charm came with a cost. He was possessive, demanding more and more of Andrea's time and attention. He encouraged her to cut ties with her old life, insisting that she didn't need anyone holding her back. "You're a star, Andrea," he told her one evening over champagne in his penthouse suite. "Don't let anyone dim your light." Andrea hesitated. She knew what Jack meant. Even if he didn't say it outright, he wanted her to leave Wilson to sever the bond that tied her to her past. But no matter how far Andrea strayed, a part of her still felt tethered to Wilson. She avoided Jack's suggestion, deflecting with excuses about how Wilson needed her support, even if it was from a distance. Still, her guilt began to nod her. Every time Wilson called, his voice filled with gratitude and love, Andrea felt a pang of shame. She would listen to him talk about his progress, how he was feeling stronger every day, and how much he missed her. She lied effortlessly, telling him how busy she was her caretaker job, fabricating stories about the wealthy family she supposedly worked for. Andrea rationalized her deceit by convincing herself that she was doing this for them, for their future. The money she sent home each month was real after all, and it was helping to keep their lives afloat. But deep down, she knew that her betrayal went far beyond financial dishonesty. Back in the suburbs, Wilson's life remained a stark contrast to Andrea's glamorous existence. Though his health had improved, he was far from his old self. He spent most of his days at home, reading books or watching television to pass the time. He missed Andrea terribly, counting down the days until her next visit. Andrea's visits had grown infrequent, each one shorter than the last. When she did come home, she seemed distracted, her mind elsewhere. Wilson chalked it up to stress from her job, never suspecting the truth. He was just grateful to have her by his side, even if only for a little while. One evening, while flipping through channels, Wilson stumbled upon a fashion show airing on a local network. He wasn't particularly interested in fashion, but something about the production caught his attention. The models paraded down the runway in extravagant outfits, their faces illuminated by blinding lights. And then he saw her, Andrea. For a moment, Wilson thought he was imagining things, but as the camera zoomed in on the model's face, there was no denying it. It was his wife, striding confidently down the runway in a shimmering gown, her smile radiant and self-assured. Wilson sat frozen, the remote slipping from his hand. His heart pounded in his chest as a flood of emotions overtook him: shock, confusion, and a growing sense of betrayal. Why hadn't Andrea told him about this? He tried to rationalize it, telling himself that maybe it was a one-time thing that she hadn't wanted to worry him. But then came the behind-the-scenes footage. The show cut to a montage of backstage moments, models laughing, makeup artists applying final touches, and photographers snapping candid shots. And there in the background was Andrea again. She wasn't alone. She was with Jack. Wilson watched in stunned silence as the camera captured a moment that shattered his world. Andrea and Jack were locked in an intimate embrace, their lips meeting in a kiss that left no room for misinterpretation. Rage surged through Wilson like a tidal wave. He couldn't believe what he was seeing. The woman he had loved and trusted, the woman who had promised to stand by him in sickness and in health, had betrayed him in the most unimaginable way. For a long time, Wilson sat in the darkened living room, his mind racing. Memories of their life together played like a cruel montage in his head. Andrea's laughter, her promises, her reassurances, all of it felt like a lie now. His initial shock gave way to a burning determination. He needed answers. He needed to confront Andrea and hear the truth from her own lips. And he knew exactly where to find her. The next morning, Wilson packed a small bag and took his savings. He told no one of his plans, determined to keep his intentions hidden. He carried with him a firearm, a relic from his younger days when he would go hunting with friends. It had been years since he'd used it, but he felt a grim sense of resolve as he tucked it into his bag. As he boarded the bus to the city, his mind was a whirlwind of emotions: betrayal, anger, and heartbreak vied for dominance. But above all, there was a sense of clarity. Wilson was a man who had been pushed to his limits, and he was determined to make Andrea face the consequences of her actions. The journey was long, giving Wilson ample time to replay the scene from the television over and over in his mind. By the time he arrived in the city, his anger had hardened into a cold, steely resolve. Wilson tracked Andrea to her apartment, the address scribbled on an envelope she had left behind during one of her visits home. He arrived late in the evening, the streets bathed in the dim glow of streetlights. Standing outside the building, he spotted movement in one of the windows. His breath caught in his throat as he saw Andrea and Jack together, their silhouettes unmistakable. The sight of them laughing, touching, and sharing an intimate moment was more than Wilson could bear. He waited in the shadows, watching as Jack eventually left the apartment. Only then did Wilson make his move. The street was eerily quiet as Jack walked away from Andrea's apartment, oblivious to the shadowed figure watching him disappear into the distance. Wilson remained in his hiding spot, his hand tightening around the cold metal of the gun concealed in his jacket. His mind was a storm of emotions: anger, heartbreak, and betrayal, all clashing violently. Yet despite the chaos within him, his actions were deliberate and calculated. He waited a few more minutes to ensure Jack was gone before stepping out of the shadows. Wilson made his way to the apartment door, his steps heavy but measured. This wasn't the reunion he had envisioned when Andrea first left for the city. Back then, he had imagined joyful embraces, stories of how she had overcome the odds to support their family, and a shared sense of pride in their perseverance. Now, all of that was gone, shattered by the image of her betrayal. He knocked on the door, Andrea, expecting Jack to have returned for something, opened it without hesitation. When she saw Wilson standing there, a mix of shock, guilt, and fear washed over her face. Her lips parted, but no words came out. She didn't need to say anything. Her expression spoke volumes. "Surprised to see me?" Wilson said, his voice low and cold. Andrea stepped back, her hand gripping the edge of the door as if to steady herself. "Woo, Wilson. What are you doing here?" Wilson stepped inside, closing the door behind him with a firm push. He looked around the apartment, taking in the luxury furnishings, the designer clothes draped over chairs, and the expensive perfume lingering in the air. This wasn't the life of a simple caretaker. "Nice place," Wilson said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Paid for with your hard-earned money, I'm sure." Andrea swallowed hard, her mind racing for an explanation. "I was going to tell you, Wilson. I got a better job, and they escalated quickly. I didn't want to overwhelm you while you were recovering." "Better job?" Wilson scoffed, his voice rising. "You call this a better job? Modeling, Andrea, and don't even try to deny it. I saw you on TV." Andrea's face turned pale. She had hoped he wouldn't find out that her secret would remain hidden until she could figure out how to explain it. But the look in Wilson's eyes told her that this wasn't just about her modeling career. "Wasn't gonna hide it forever," she said weakly. "Oh, I'm sure you weren't," Wilson snapped. "But what about him?" Andrea froze, her heart pounding in her chest. "I don't know what you're talking about. Don't play dumb with me." "Andrea," Wilson growled, "I saw you on TV kissing that man. Jack isn't it, your boss?" Andrea's silence was deafening. She lowered her head, unable to meet his gaze. "Do you have any idea what you've done to me?" Wilson's voice cracked, the pain evident. "I gave you everything, Andrea. My trust, my love, my life. And this is how you repay me." Andrea finally looked up, her eyes filled with tears. "Wilson, I didn't mean for it to happen. I was desperate. You were sick, and we needed the money. Jack, he helped me. He made me feel." "Don't you dare." Wilson interrupted, his voice trembling with rage. "Don't you dare try to justify this. I was sick, yes, but I was still your husband. I trusted you to stand by me, to honor the vows we made, but instead you sold yourself to the highest bidder." Andrea's tears turned to anger. "You think I wanted this? You think I enjoyed watching you waste away while I worked myself to the bone to keep us afloat? You don't understand what it was like, Wilson. You weren't there." "I wasn't there because I couldn't be," Wilson shouted, his voice echoing through the apartment. "And instead of standing by me, you ran. You turned your back on me and destroyed everything we built together." Andrea tried to step closer, her hands outstretched in a gesture of reconciliation. "Please, Wilson, let me explain. Let me make this right." Wilson took a step back, his hand moving to the gun concealed in his jacket. "There's no making this right, Andrea. Not after what you've done." Andrea's eyes widened as she saw the weapon. "Wilson, no. Please don't do this. Think about what you're doing." Wilson's grip on the gun tightened as tears streamed down his face. "I've thought about it, Andrea. I've thought about it ever since I saw you with him. You destroyed me. You destroyed us." Andrea fell to her knees sobbing. "I'm sorry, Wilson. I'm so sorry. Please don't do this." But Wilson's pain had consumed him. "Please don't do this." But Wilson's pain had consumed him. With a trembling hand, he raised the gun and pointed it at her. "I loved you, Andrea, more than anything in this world, and you threw it all away." The shot echoed through the apartment, followed by a deafening silence. Andrea's lifeless body slumped to the floor, a pool of blood spreading beneath her. Wilson stood frozen, the gun still in his hand. The reality of what he had done hit him like a freight train. His legs gave out, and he sank to the floor, staring at Andrea's body with a mixture of horror and grief. "I didn't want this," he whispered to himself. "I didn't want any of this." The police arrived within hours, alerted by neighbors who had heard the gunshot. Wilson made no attempt to flee. He sat on the floor, the gun lying beside him, waiting for the inevitable. When the officers entered the apartment, he didn't resist. At the station, Wilson confessed everything. He told the detectives about Andrea's betrayal, about the affair, and about the moment his anger overcame him. His voice was steady, almost attached, as he recounted the events leading up to the crime. Jack was brought in for questioning, his demeanor smug and unapologetic. He admitted to the affair, but claimed he had no idea Andrea was still married. His testimony only fueled Wilson's sense of betrayal. During the trial, Wilson's lawyer painted him as a man pushed to his breaking point, a victim of circumstance and betrayal. The prosecution, however, argued that no amount of betrayal justified taking another person's life. In the end, Wilson was convicted of second-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison. As he sat in his cell, he replayed the events over and over in his mind, questioning whether there had been another way. But deep down, he knew the truth. Andrea's betrayal had broken something within him, something that could never be repaired. Andrea's betrayal had broken something within him, something that could never be repaired. Wilson's story became a cautionary tale, a tragic reminder of how love, betrayal, and anger can collide with devastating consequences. Jack, untouched by the legal system, continued his career, but his reputation was forever tarnished. And Andrea, her life, her choices, and her death served as a stark reminder of the fragile nature of trust and the destructive power of lies. Thank you for being with me until this point in the video. I would appreciate it if you like the video to support me and subscribe to my channel and press the bell so that you don't miss the videos we publish every day. Thank you.